for those of us joining us as guests, I invite you to please mute yourself during this beginning part of the session. If you have questions, we'll be happy to address them in the later part. For those of you that don't have the privilege of knowing, my name is Christian de Grey Cardenas. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Opera America. Welcome to one of our case studies. This case study is specifically about how Tapestry Opera's rehearsal process has led the organization to other process changes and how they've reimagined the rehearsal process and structure in this new normal that we are trying to achieve. With us today, we have Jaime Martino, who is the Executive Director for Tapestry Opera, who those of you who were in the last panel heard some very eloquent things from. And joining her are Yvette Nolan, who is a librettist and co-director for their piece, which Yvette, please pronounce the name of the show for me one more time.
Shonadithit.
Thank you very much. And Marion Newman, who was the mezzo-soprano and said title character of that show. So the way that this will work is I'm going to let our panelists here speak a little bit about their company and their process. And then I will ask a couple of questions. And then I will invite all of you to, if you have any questions you would like to ask, you can either raise your hand using the raise hand function, and Jamila on our team here from Opera America will bring you on video. It'll feel very much like you're on a TV show and suddenly you pop in and you'll join us and you can ask your question, or you can type it into the chat box and we'll address it that way. Okay, and so with that said, Jaime, I turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. I'm Jaime Martino. I'm Executive Director of Tapestry Opera. I am here in Toronto, which is the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat, caretaken by the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. I already said that. And Tapestry Opera is Tapestry Opera is a new works only company. So our mandate is to create new works of Canadian opera, and that mandate is feels very specific, but as this last year has shown us, is actually quite free. That new opera this year has looked like sketch comedy, has looked like music videos and short films. We streamed some concerts. We took a traveling trailer stage to care homes and hospitals all summer and are about to start doing that again for this year. So, when we sat down about a year ago and we thought, well, what do we do? What are we for? It became pretty clear that we could be any number of things and we could do any number of things and still be true to the kind of work that we wanted to create and the kind of space that we wanted to hold. And that space, we try and are always trying to do better at this, and we move quickly, which can get in the way of this. And this is one of the lessons that Shonadithit taught us for sure. But we try and approach from a position of collaboration, that everyone in the room is bringing something that is valuable to the piece or the conversation, and that everyone's presence is valued for its own sake. So that was the attitude we tried to bring into Shonadithit as well. And I'm just going to hand it over to Yvette and Marion to talk a little bit more about that. So Yvette, maybe you'll tell us a little bit about Shonadithit, the piece.
Sure. Chimigwech, Jamie. Yvette Nadishnikas, Kitaganzi B Nondanjaba. My name is Yvette. My people are from Kitaganzi B Algonquin First Nation in Quebec, but I'm coming to you from Treaty 6 territory in Canada, which is Cree territory. I'm in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. And that is the way I introduced myself, but it is also germane to this conversation because Shonadithit was about the woman named Shonadithit, who is referred to as the last of the Beothuk people, which was a nation that was extirpated on Turtle Island in Newfoundland. And there's more to be discussed about that. My pal, my old friend, Dean Bury, who's an opera composer, theater rat like me, had taken a couple of runs at doing Shonadithit as an opera because he is fascinated with that story, being born and bred in Newfoundland. But he's a white man, and And it was never satisfying enough. So at some point he reached out to me and said, I want to do Shauna Diffit. Do you want to write the libretto? And I'm like, sure. I mean, I knew the story because in Canada, it is for Indigenous, we know that this nation had been disappeared, the first nation to be disappeared in Canada. So, and he went to Tapestry and said, this is the project, or I don't know the order that happened. I'm thinking of doing this. Anyway, Tapestry said, yeah, let's do this project. We were on the verge of celebrating the sesquicentennial in Canada. And this project was going to speak to that in some way, which I thought was smart and clever. Dean and I started writing the libretto. Dean and I talked a lot about it. And I realized really quickly that in order to write the libretto, I had to include a bunch of other Indigenous voices because we didn't have Shauna Diffit, we didn't have the Beothuk people to talk to us. We didn't have elders to whom we could go of that nation. And Shauna Diffit left behind no words, but she left some sketches. And we took those sketches and we sort of shared them with different Indigenous artists of different disciplines who brought their art to that thing. And in that way, so I wrote a libretto with space in it for all these other Indigenous artists to create responses to what Shauna Diffit had left us. And then Dean and I were back and forth on the music and the language, which I understand is not traditionally the way opera is made. So it was right from the very beginning, it was a very collaborative process. I always knew I was writing for Marion Newman, and that helped a lot. And then Tapestry had been doing work about equity, diversity, inclusion work. And they proceeded with us every step of the way, making space for the kind of process that we needed to do. And that meant it was in some ways slower, but sometimes you go slow to go fast. Marion, over to you.
Yeah, I'm meant to speak about the rehearsal process, but you've reminded me that I was a part of the entire workshop process as well, right from first libretto reading. And so I entered the rehearsal process already knowing some of the team, certainly having worked with everyone before in some way. And so I also was entering, having done a bunch of different Indigenous projects that weren't necessarily led by Indigenous people, or even created by Indigenous people or with Indigenous content at all. So that feeling of having a story told about you by someone who doesn't actually know what it is to live the experience was something that I was very familiar with. And when I entered into this, I knew I would be in a safe place because of how Yvette runs things, because of how Tapestry has big ears and big hearts. And when they hear something, they respond. And it was an uncomfortable suggestion for our first day that came just in some of the scheduling. And when I wrote to Tapestry to say, how come this is happening, they immediately responded and changed and apologized. And we moved forward from a place where I knew that I was being heard. And that doesn't happen in every company. So that was huge. So I knew I was entering a space of friends. When we rehearsed, every single rehearsal we opened with somewhere between 5 to 15 minutes of a check-in or a movement-oriented exercise or a song, just something sitting in a circle, something where we would all connect. And that included anybody who wanted to come in from administration, stage management, composer, repetiteur, players. It was everyone. So we were all a team, and there's an understanding that we couldn't do this work without everyone included. And I think that it does seem like you're taking a lot of time out of rehearsal to spend that time every single day. But in that moment, in those moments of checking in, of connecting with each other, we were leaving behind the outside, and we were getting to know each other really well, learning to trust each other, learning to be able to look each other right in the eye, learning to see when we were a little fried from our trip to the studio or what have you, so that we were really tuned into each other. And because of that, when we got down to work, the work went deep really quickly. And as a result, I think that the show ended up being deeper than many that I've been involved in. We knew we could rely on each other, and that trust building is so important, and it's something that I want to bring into every process that I'm involved in now.
That's wonderful. I thank all of you for getting us started on this discussion. I confess you've all been so eloquent and have already answered some of the questions I was going to even ask you. So we will continue to just kind of expand on some of these topics. Jaime, I want to point out something that you said in the last panel that I thought was really meaningful, which is an intentional, pervasive, radical philosophy of care. And I thought that was just very well said. And one of the things I wanted to ask you was, you said radical care is how trust is built. So how can a producer or presenter establish caring practices that are done in an honest and meaningful way?
Well, I mean, I think there is the obvious that you don't have to navigate what that looks like alone, that the people who are involved in the creation of the work and your artists and team, often people have a really good idea of what they need. That being said, I don't think it's necessarily always equitable to require people to ask for what they need or even to know exactly what that is. And so I think Marian touched on something, and this is something I hear a lot, where people are afraid. They tried it once and got a backlash, and so now they don't want to try again. And there is no way forward that way. That uncomfortable suggestion she mentioned, it came from me with all my good intentions, and I just wasn't listening hard enough. And there is no way out from that. That is going to happen to you if you are engaging honestly in work like this. And that can't be a thing that holds you back. It has to be a thing that you take as a gift. Like the response that we got from Marian to my suggestion was so generous that it felt like a gift that she would say, here is why I don't like this. Here is what I'd prefer instead. When she didn't have to do any of that, like we don't necessarily deserve to be educated and corrected on our journeys along the way. And anytime that happens to you, that is a gift that person is giving you. And you can have your feelings, but like, do it over there.
Just to expand on that a little bit, and you've said this a number of times that your people know what your organization needs. How do you recommend? Is there any practical, tangible ways that you recommend beginning that conversation of having that kind of engagement? Is there anything you've learned? Yeah.
Well, I don't want to suggest something that will work for everyone because we're quite a small organization, and I'm quite adamant about this. And so I think that partly it does need to come from leadership, and that it maybe doesn't matter where you start so much as it matters that it continues, that it's consistent, that you're showing up again and again, because that trust isn't going to be built in one conversation. And if you get it wrong in your first conversation, you just have to have a second one. And maybe you'll get it wrong in your fourth one, but then you have to have a fifth one.
Yep.
If I may, it might be the size of the organization that's part of it, but something that Tapestry did, and it took me a long time to realize this, was they shared leadership in allowing me to speak up and in responding like I was on a level with them, and by respecting what I had to say. And that has bestowed me with more of a sense of feeling like I can speak up and like I can do that in other companies as well, because it isn't just for me, it's for everyone, it's for the better good. And they clearly understood that. So I think that sharing, mistakes will happen. They happen to everybody, me all the time. And so watching someone experience a mistake in that way and respond so beautifully let me know that we were all human and that I can make mistakes too when you're working on anything, but especially in new work. And it just creates an environment in which you feel safe and ready to dig in and bring your best self.
And it's brave. I commend everybody on this for it takes a lot to acknowledge mistakes and to be open about that and to lead by example on that front. I think that's a very brave thing that that sounds like everybody across the board working on this project was open with, was about taking those chances. Marion, let me just press a little bit more on what you just said there, because I oftentimes find that artists don't feel that they have a voice, particularly in the creative process and in the workshop process, even through rehearsal, that you're kind of expected to do as you're told. And as you said earlier, you know, particularly when you're working on stories about you from people written without that perspective experience, I think that can be very frustrating. So how specifically, you know, was this different? How did you feel that you have more of a voice or more agency in the process? Were there any practical things that were done that were helpful to you?
I think it's the connections that came ahead of time. I'd worked with Yvette. Yvette always opens a rehearsal with a check-in of some sort, and with some ceremony, with an acknowledgement of the fact that we aren't the only people in the room. And I think that alleviates some of the pressure that you put on yourself in inviting in the people who came before and the people who will come after you, to help hold that together, as in collectively hold that together.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yvette, I'll turn it to you then to then further expand, but from your perspective, you know, as the co-director for the piece, you know, what are some of the other things that you did that was different about this rehearsal process than the more traditional rehearsal processes that we see?
Yeah, for me, I've been working in Indigenous theater for a long time and developing an Indigenous theater practice, and taking that into Tapestry, which in and of itself is an act of trust, right? So we agreeing to work on the project, and then Michael inviting me to be the co-director of the piece, which was a huge leap for him. I haven't directed opera. I'm a theater rat. I wrote the libretto, so there's also a different kind of investment in there. But Tapestry was so committed to learning from us that made it possible. So one of the ways I work is like, this is the typical structure with like a hierarchy, someone at the top saying that everybody's idea is equal, but not meaning it. And what we do is we take that structure and we tip it on its side, and then it becomes a circle. And then we say, which we always say, everybody says, everybody's experience, knowledge is valid, and they bring it to the circle, but we really mean it. Everybody starts to feel empowered in the room, that they have agency, that they're bringing all of their knowledge and skill to the room. And that makes a difference. It makes such a difference. So Michael and I working together, we also had a choreographer, Michelle Olson, who took her space with us. So it wasn't, now we have a directing team of 3. So it continues to grow, right? And every time the artists from away came in to look at their stuff, they brought their voices. So, but more makes more. So powerful is this, in fact, that I think we kind of wrecked Marion Newman, that now she doesn't want to go and do work in other rooms that is not like this.
Yeah.
But this also works because talking about scale, right? Like Tapestry is a small, nimble, forward-looking organization. But Marion and I have recently done a project started at Calgary Opera, and Marion's the lead on that. And she negotiated this kind of working inside Calgary Opera. And so we go there with our practice, bringing in our team and everyone around us. And we say, this is the way we work. You're welcome to participate with us. We want you in the room. And we change the space and the organization by the way we work, which is kind of fantastic at this stage of the game, because we've all been talking about it for 20 years. And now we're actually in the place where let's just do it. Let us just make the change. Let us work the way we want to work. Let us be who we are. Let's be in the room with people. Let's only get into rooms with people who are willing to move forward this way. And I think that's the way we change the bigger organizations. I mean, Marion's also on the COC advisory, right? The Indigenous Circle. And so we change the organizations by being in them, but by having the generosity offered to us from those other people, that they too want to learn, and that they have to do their own work as well as us doing the work.
Yeah, one of the things I've been asking for when I'm on a new gig is just to, may I have a chat with whoever's the leader, and can I find out who else is in this? Because I've gone to gigs and discovered that I could have been working on something with someone who lives down the street from me, but I didn't know until I got there on the first day of rehearsal. So just sharing information about who the team will be, you can actually have a Zoom call and build a team before you get there, and alleviate the nerves that happen, and give yourself an opportunity to actually get the work started before you're there.
Thank you for both of you for sharing that, because oftentimes I find people who are resistant to working in this fashion always say, well, you can't lead by committee. Well, it's going to be, what's going to happen when there's conflict and somebody has to make a decision, then it's going to destroy all the collaboration because the director has to, step in and say, no, this is the way it's going to be. It is nice to see that if you just try, that this can continue. But if that specifically on that point, what does happen when there's a severe disagreement or a serious, lack of understanding between the group about where to move forward? How is that mediated in your experience?
Well, it depends. In some cases, it's depending on the investment of the other players, it's a small thing, and it's mediated through discussion, through conversation. And often that's what happens. We stop and talk about things. In larger situations, and we have faced some of them, sometimes it's just that we, the inner circle, the actual company, just circle up and take care of each other and go and decide amongst ourselves how we're going to get through this. Because there is, we're still trying to figure out how to partner outside of the immediate circle. Largely it's communication. Largely it is because most people are not coming to these projects to be obstructionist or to be insensitive. Often they don't know. And so the bravery in that case, the courage comes from deciding what the discussion is, having the conversation, being honest in the circle. And this is one of the benefits we have of working in circle, is like, that's the rule. You are safe to say the things you need to say in the circle and listen to each other fully. So it's communication. It's about knowing that not one person holds power, because every kind of power is in that. No matter what we can say, that it's equally divided, but everyone has a kind of power, right? But if you're the librettist, or if you're the composer, or if you're the co-director, or if you're the mezzo, like everyone has some kind of power. So how are we going to negotiate that in our group?
I think sometimes we end up deciding amongst ourselves that one or two people should be the ones to make this particular decision as well. So the decision is made by everyone to put it on somebody else's shoulder.
Oh, that's great. No, but that's important to establish that. And I want to ask just one more question on my end before I turn it over to the audience. Yvette, you alluded to this earlier. Marion, you've been a little spoiled, it sounds like, through this process. And I wanted to ask you, after going through this experience, are there things now that you expect from other opera companies when you work with them? And are there things specifically that you would say, I'm not willing to work anymore unless some of the things I learned through this process happen? Is there anything like that for you?
I would say I spent a lot of years being not spoiled at all, first of all. So I earned my way here.
Yeah.
A mezzo who is Indigenous. I am Kwagilth and Stalo, and I'm also half settler, English, Irish, Scottish on my mother's side. And negotiating that mess, that beautiful mess, has been a part of my whole life. And I think maybe that has helped me to grow into somebody who does like to negotiate so that everyone has a fair deal. I'm also an older sister. So there's just, a part of me that likes to make sure that the whole team is working well. And that, yes, I've been spoiled in that I've been able to see how much better it feels to have a voice. But I had to get to the point where, and not in Shana Did It, it was a different gig altogether. where I was so uncomfortable, and I could see that everyone was so uncomfortable, that I was forced to speak up, because I realized I wouldn't be able to go forward. And if you're just like all clamped up with stress, you can't sing, you can't do your job. And so it was one of those breaking points that really got me to the point of just like, I'm just going to say some stuff out loud, because I think everyone needs to be talking about this instead of ignoring the elephant in the room. And when that didn't go terribly for me, I gained a bit of confidence from that. And so it's one of those snowball effects. So yes, I'm spoiled now. And yes, there are definitely gigs I would say no to. But I will always have a chat first to see if I can negotiate what will make that comfortable.
And I do want to clarify, spoiled is the wrong word long term, because now what we're really talking about is that we're moving from spoiled to a necessity. Like, this is the kind of work that needs to happen and needs to be done, and artists are equal participant partners in this, and they're partners, they're not just brought in. So the whole idea of giving artists a say in that capacity and taking care of them should not be spoiled. It should be the bare minimum. So I did want to correct myself on that front. I want to turn it over to the audience if they have any questions. If not, I'm happy to continue this dialogue, but I do want to give people the opportunity to speak up should they wish to.
If I could just, before we do that, I just want to say that, like, we are, like, when we have these kinds of conversations about this particular show and the way that it ran, we're often asked about how we handled conflict in the rehearsal room, as you did. And it felt like our greatest conflicts were not in the rehearsal room. They were imposed from without. So it was other people, other structures who did not understand how we were trying to operate or what we were trying to do. Yvette, remember when the museum told us we couldn't use the works? This is like the white owners of the museum where the sketches were housed said, no, you cannot use these images. If I am walking to Newfoundland, I'm starting right now. Or the way that opera media would call it Dean Bury's Shauna did it, and we had to correct them over and over and over again. And it was because he was the composer, and that's the structure they understood, that this piece belongs to him in some way. And so I would say that, we worked together in the way that felt intuitive and comfortable and communicative and all those things. And the tension was from the outside, trying to impose the structures that they understood upon us.
But the great thing about that is that's how you learn how we feel all the time.
Yeah, no
right?
doubt about it.
So like once you're in the boat with us, it's like, holy shit, it's really rocky out here, isn't it? And I'm like, yeah, welcome to our existence.
Yeah, there was more than one moment when I would just be furious and Yvette would be like, can we know, like.
That was a good Yvette.
It's so interesting because I think that's a very good point to make and to really take a moment to reflect on, because oftentimes people, organizations want to have best intentions, and other organizations don't see those good intentions and go right back to their systematic processes, and therefore create conflict that wasn't there and starting for you. And that's an industry-wide problem. That's a worldwide problem. So I'll turn it around and Jamie, and just ask you what was the biggest lesson that you learned through this process, or what surprised you about doing this?
So I thought that I knew, as Yvette said, you take time to make time. And that is definitely the biggest lesson I took away. And I was surprised that it was a lesson for me because I thought I already understood it. But I remember very keenly, especially in that first day, the first rehearsal, you remember handing the cedar branch around. We did a talking circle, and it lasted for 90 minutes, 2 hours. And I remember thinking, particularly on behalf of the men in the room, that they would feel like this was a waste of time, that all this talk of feelings. And of course they did not. And everyone, once the space was there, everyone wanted it. And everyone took it, like people were crying and we were laughing with each other. And it was so beautiful. And I will never forget feeling like, oh no, we don't have time for this, and then being like, that's like the wrong thinking. You're bringing wrong thinking into this.
And it's, and I think the important part of this is if people feel guided and if people are open to it, then it's great. But I empathize with that, the producer mentality too, of sometimes going, I don't want to freak out 2 or 3 people for the sake of the benefit of the rest of the group. And it's interesting to get rid of our own little internal demons that tell us how things might go wrong before we even attempted it.
And every time I've done something like that since, where I've opened a space or a group of people, and I'll make, create space to talk about feelings, and I try and I will always lead because I'm the leader of the organization, or one of the leaders of the organization. It's got to come from the top, so I'll try and model that vulnerability. And every single time, people match it. Every time. And every time someone will say to me, gosh, thank you, I really needed to talk about that. Every time. People want that space.
Absolutely. How do you think this process on working on this show has changed Tapestry for the long term?
There's one big one that I don't think I can say diplomatically.
I don't want to put you in trouble, so don't say anything.
But I do. There is I would say my biggest takeaway is that one, which I honest to God cannot find a way to say that I could do publicly. But that everything that was true for Shauna Dibbett is not only true because it was in Indigenous production and needed specific things. Many of those things are always required. That kind of collaboration, that kind of circular, the circular communication, the tip on its side, as Yvette put it, that's always going to be valuable. And it doesn't matter what the project is or what the meeting is about, or it's always, it is always going to be, for me, a better way to get at the heart of something.
And I thank you for saying that, because oftentimes we start to think about radical change in our processes only as it relates to diversity initiatives that the board is interested in at a certain moment, or because they're trying to reach a different demographic or target audience pool. And we don't think, some of these processes are actually good for all of our work. And it's important that we just continue kind of doing that. If that's something I wanted to ask you on that front is, oftentimes I see, initiatives from opera companies saying, let's tell different kinds of stories. Let's work with underrepresented groups in a new fashion, but they never talk about taking care of them once they're in the room. So it's always about, let's get people in and let's start doing this work. But I would imagine that with the process that you all went through, there's a constant check-in that's needed, and there's a taking care process. And I would feel a lot of that would fall on you as the co-director. Is there anything you'd like to speak on that or share about what it means to actively take care of your artists once they're in the rehearsal space and it's a continuing process?
Well, taking care of everybody. Like, it's interesting, like taking care of your audience, because in the same way that, like, now sing, now goodbye, we should be developing the same kind of relationships with our audiences, where it's not just like, come and see our play that's targeted at the Asian American audience, now goodbye. Because we should be making relationships, like with all of the people at all of the levels, whether that's our artists or our audiences or our funders or like whoever it is. It's all relational. And I just think, someone used the word radical. Oh, Jamie probably, who uses it a lot. But radical means at the root. And if we're going to make radical change, we have to be making change at that level. And that means change in every aspect of our organizations, from our staff to our boards, to our artists, to the rhetoric that we put out there. It has to be, we have to mean it. So we can't be like, we want to bring more people of color into our opera, and so we're going to target them. In theater, we call those things like the dim sum slot, the bannock slot, the curry slot, we're just like being picked off a menu and then discarded. that we can't do that anymore. We can't afford to do that anymore. The world has changed. And that, I think, has been, for me, the sort of the great thing about the last 15 months or whatever is I don't think we can afford to go back to that kind of thinking.
And, you know, and I completely agree with you. And ultimately, I think from a very, very basic watering down of everything you've said in a horrible way, but it also makes the work better. Like the work is also, you know, when the more people enjoy doing the work, the better the work is, which ultimately helps everybody across every demographic of, you know, whether audiences, board engagement, artists. It just makes better work, and it means people are happier doing it.
And receiving it.
Yes, and being open to receiving it. And the idea of having to go back to a structure that isn't that is probably terrifying. Marion, I see you're eagerly raising.
I'm using the word closure because it's not just, I talked about opening a rehearsal so that everyone's checked in and seeing each other, but leaving a rehearsal, if you've been working on something that's a really difficult subject matter, there's also a need to close that out and to say you don't have to bring that out into the world with you. And you do that with your audience as well. When there is a difficult piece, you know, you give them closure, you let them know there's still connection, or that what ways you can still, they can reach out to you or be reached out to beyond the end of the show. And that is about keeping those connections going as well, which I'll leave it to.
Absolutely. I would like to, this is my last call for audiences. If anybody has a question, if you'd like to type into the chat or raise your hand. If not, then I will begin to close this out by just asking if there's anything else that either of you three would like to share with us. Any final thoughts? Yeah.
I have a question. Could you spell the name of the opera for me? This is not a story I know, and I'd like to look it up.
I'll put it in the chat.
Okay. Thank you.
There are lots of different books and articles available about this. And if you can find anything that includes Indigenous authorship, you'll have a better version of the story.
Yeah, it tends to be the case, but thank you for being specifically clear about that. Often that's forgotten. Great. Well, I have to say I'm just very impressed by the way that this was discussed by y'all and the ideas behind it. It's not often that I find myself in a position where I go, I need to correct my thinking in advance to some of the ways that this is seen, because it's deep thinking, it's deep different approach to the work. It's not just the execution of it. There's a whole deep layers, which Jaime, you've expertly expressed what some of those are too. So thank you for, personally for me, thank you that you've opened my eyes up a little bit more. I hope this has been the same for the other members here. And please don't change. Please continue to expand and grow what you're doing. And I very much look forward to seeing your work. And thank you for your time. For everybody else here, this is our last day of the conference. There is some closing sessions tomorrow, and you can check everything out on our website. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.